Welcome to this episode of Decision Making Under Fire. How to stay clear when your stakes are high. When pressure spikes, especially for executive leader, this is when clarity is needed the most. And guess what? Clarity is usually the first thing that leaders leave, that they leave. They do leave it. It's the first thing they lose when they're pressured, they have public scrutiny, they have rapid changes, or just plain distractions in their day to day, which usually happens for most executive leaders. And today's episode is about keeping your head when everyone else is losing theirs. So, especially when you have crisis moments, deadlines, financial risks, public relations issues, these are some of the most challenging things to handle in the moment. And yes, I highly recommend taking some improv classes, which are both fun and they help you to learn to speak in the moment and have confidence. However, this one isn't always going to help you out in just speaking in the moment. You have to be clear on your ultimate purpose that you have and especially the outcomes that you want. One of the examples I have for myself is about 33 years ago taking private pilot license training. And some of my instructors always hit hard on, Cory, there are about 7 or 8 different phases of flight, but 2 of them are the most critical. One is taking off and the other is landing. And if you don't have a sterile cockpit, which just means organized, clean, accessible, and there's no other distractions or people talking in the background getting your attention, if you have the sterile cockpit, it's going to help you to have the best outcome when it comes to taking off and then, of course, landing. And usually there's not a problem with landing. You're going to land somewhere, but you usually want to land at your intended destination at the right time. And these things are critical. So one of the areas is when you're emotionally hijacked. And how do you know if you're emotionally hijacked? Well, one of the reasons or one of the ways to know this is that if you have a fear-based mentality or mindset or habits or belief system. I know I suffered with this for a long time before becoming aware of this. And it was such an ingrained habit, I couldn't even see that that's how I was making decisions. But if anything was fearful or I was uncertain about, I would make a decision I just wouldn't move in the right direction. I'd be so hesitant to make the direction. I wouldn't take responsibility for any outcomes that would come. I was always ready to point my finger at somebody. And then many times it can feel rushed if you're emotionally hijacked. You just never feel ready to make that decision. And so you kind of set yourself up for not making commitments, not committing to yourself, not committing to your organization or your teams, not committing to the intended outcome that you're expected to achieve or that you would like to achieve. And then being avoidant of these decisions also affects everybody else. And to be honest with you, even if we're doing this in our day-to-day, in our roles, in our businesses, in our careers, doesn't that also affect what we do outside of our work? Aren't we setting up habit patterns and decision-making skills that we use in every area of our life, in our families, and those other areas? It could be all different types of things. So once we set up a pattern of something, it gets ingrained in our system. And then sometimes if it's so ingrained or you've been doing it for a long time, it is difficult to see unless you have someone else pointing out some of those blind spots, because we all have blind spots. So common signs of having this fear-based mentality or even a reactive decision-making is you're over-communicating without clarity. So you're talking too much, whether that's through messaging, making too many calls, messaging all the time instead of creating a trust and a confidence in your team members. So an example of this is if you had a deadline by Friday and all you said was, hey, get this deadline done. Do you have any questions? There's no questions. Everybody's clear on things. And then all of a sudden you're messaging Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday before the deadline and checking in on people. This is pretty much just micromanaging. And when you do that, it degrades trust, degrades people's confidence. It takes away the relatability and the joy of people working with you and feeling empowered. So you're doing a lot of disservice when you're over communicating. And this can also be the opposite direction. Maybe you're not communicating enough. So you just you just let it go. You set the goal, assume everybody knows their roles, assume everybody has the deadlines and is understood and clear in what outcome happens. And there's too much assumptions. And we know what happens when you assume. We all know what that means. And if you don't, look it up and search it out. And you'll find out what that typically means. But when you assume things, that's also not a great thing, because then you are pretty much setting up people to fail. I used to work in an environment as an employee that a lot of these outcomes were just assumed. And just because someone was given an instruction and they said, oh, yeah, I understand that. I totally understand. I got it. Doesn't tell you exactly what they got or what they understand, which is why I go back to aviation. And it doesn't always have to happen this way, but in most of our calls for aviation, when we're communicating with the control tower, we need to clearly reflect back exactly what instructions were given us by the controller. And that's to make sure that we're the right airplane and call sign that's receiving it, so nobody else accidentally received it. And also to what's expected. Are we cleared for landing? Are we cleared for takeoff? Are we supposed to make a procedure turn? What are we trying to do? And so in our businesses, maybe we develop a different cadence, but something that creates that clarity, something that has all the elements in it to make sure we get back what we're looking for. And that communication is actually very grounded. Another area is freezing up or avoiding making decisions. So this is another huge sign that if you realize that, wow, I'm actually freezing up and I don't really make a decision, or I say, hey, let's get back to that, and you don't put a deadline on it, or ooh, thanks for that question. I have and you have a stack or a list of decisions you need to make, so you're just putting them on the list. But if you don't clearly communicate that of what's going on, or giving a deadline for when you'll be able to answer something, or to get more clarity on the situation and more research maybe, then you freezing and avoiding those decisions is not only going to affect your promotion, also to effectively helping the organization to grow and win in those leadership teams. So it affects a lot when you're in a leadership position. It doesn't just affect you. It affects so many things more in the future and currently. And once again, that's setting up a habit. And when we start setting up habits, they all of a sudden start to disintegrate out of our awareness. They become subconscious and ingrained. Another area of a common sign of just reactive decision making is making calls just to make the discomfort stop. So you make a decision, a quick decision, and it's not a well-founded decision. And I know I've done this in many things before, whether it's the littlest things like, ooh, I'm going to rush and fire off this email, make a decision on something. And all of a sudden I realize, ooh, I didn't even think that out. I didn't think about the process, the outcome, and I didn't empower people. So what ended up happening is it was wasted time and effort, multiplied wasting time and effort on my part, on the people I was communicating with. And then that either costs money, that costs time, and especially it costs lost opportunity, because we're reworking things. We're redoing the work, where most likely if we had thought about it and were clear on our decision making, we would have had a better outcome and opportunity. So, and once you do that, you miss out on a lot of different possibilities for new growth, new promotions, and just pure success. So it's so important to realize some of these common symptoms of poor decision making. And here's a framework when you're under fire. Number one of the biggest things that I found that's helped me and many executives is that you pause before you pivot or pause before you make a decision. Slow down to speed up. And for me, this was so counterintuitive because I just want to make, I hated going through the process. I never wanted to slow down and smell the roses on anything I was doing. I had to go from point A to point B. And that's all that was important to me, rather than realizing, hey, part of success is the journey. The success isn't just the destination. Part of it's the journey, because you learn, you have fulfillment, and it also gives you purpose. And purpose is one thing a lot of executives are looking for in the work they do. So having clarity, the real question is, what's the actual decision here? What's the actual decision? What's your outcome that you are trying to create? And does it fulfill what your organization wants, what you and your department or departments would like to see happen? And how is that going to set you up in the future to create better products, better services, or to troubleshoot a client challenge? How's it going to help you save time on all that in the future? Because if you're doing things now and making the great tweaks and have great awareness on what's going on, you not only are learning from this situation, but this will multiply down the road. Because if you can save 5 minutes a day on developing a product or your service towards your clients, if you can save 5 minutes a day, how much does that multiply? In a week, that's 5 days, that's roughly a half an hour. In a month, that's about 2 hours. In a whole year, that's about 24 hours you're saving in a year. And then really it goes over clients too, the number of clients that you're handling. So it can multiply in a real quickly, and you're able to take on more clients, more revenue, more challenges that you're solving for everyone that you're working for and that you've partnered with. Our partners are everybody from our service providers, our subcontractors, our employees, our organization, and of course, all the way up to our end user or client. So it's important to identify these constraints and realize that you have non-negotiables when it comes to your decision making. And of course, these start with your own personal values. Are your decisions, are they aligned with your own personal values, or is there some type of a conflict? What kind of a conflict? Well, it could be maybe you're at the lowest end, you're doing something unethical, or your organization is. Or maybe you're not being completely honest. And, whether it's white lies or errors of omission, whatever it may be, make sure you have the highest values and intent for yourself, your staff, and then your clients that you're serving. And really check these values. And for me, part of those values are my faith. I'm a Christian, and my faith comes first. And many years, many decades, I have not honored my faith, which is my identity and where my identity starts from. So I've been operating basically two identities or multiple identities for a long period of time. And that gets exhausting, trying to figure out, when do I add in this part of my identity? When do I take out this part? I'm over here and I got to change myself. And that's like I heard from my mother-in-law a long time ago. And one thing she said is it's very difficult for her to be around people who are habitual liars. I'm just going to say it like it is. It's kind of harsh for you hear me say that, but you can't hang around habitual liars once they've set a track record, because it's so exhausting. And then they have to try to remember what story they told people. And it's terrible because many times they catch themselves up by not telling the truth over here or omitting something. So on both ends of the scale, it's difficult. And then you set up yourself for being untrusted. You not trusting yourself because you don't have the integrity, and also to that partnership or that relationship is definitely tainted in many different ways. You also have to realize too what's non-negotiable in terms of your mission, or what's even legal, not just ethical, but what's legal. And when you break those non-negotiables, if you're doing things that quite are on the edge maybe of your mission but not quite aligned, that's once again going to multiply. So you're not just hurting yourself now, it's going to multiply. So it's important that you gather just enough data to avoid perfectionist or being a perfectionist. And I know in some ways I've been more of a perfectionist in the past. I've let go of some of those things, realizing I've got to make a good decision or better decisions, but I don't have to make the perfect decision. Right? And I think of, we're in football season right now, and you think of some of the pro teams, they make the best decisions they can when offense is on the field, and they make some play calls. But depending on how the defense or how the world responds, the opposition responds, or how their own team responds, they may need to change that play down the road and learn from that. That, oh, we thought this was the best thing to go on, but many times it's not perfect, but that's okay because we can adjust, we can become adaptable. And if those are habits and a mindset and a culture we're creating, then yes, let's move forward. Let's become adaptable. Let's learn on a regular basis. And perfectionism, I know a lot of leaders who are in that mode, and maybe they've had a great track record of it, but I can imagine the amount of stress and overwhelm and just how much it overcomes them. Oh my goodness. Day to day and every day to have to show up like that. I remember when I was in that mode, I'd have to show up like that and have this demeanor about me that, oh yeah, I don't make decisions, I show up on time, and no, I'm not perfect, and I'm so glad I let go of that, because guess what? When I treat myself that way and accept that I'm not perfect, I can also do that for other people and give them grace and allow that to become the part of the culture and apologize. I just did that with one of my team members. I made a mistake and I said some things that might have looked like I was pointing the finger on them. I wasn't, so I had to come back and apologize and really share that I was like, hey, I care for you and you didn't make any mistake here. This was my mistake and I didn't check. It happens to us all the time when we're in the moment. I didn't check well enough or get enough thorough details before I communicated to you what I did. And communicating through messaging, it was through WhatsApp, that it didn't, I felt it probably came across very judgmental. And so I don't know if it did at this point. I haven't communicated back with them yet, but I told them and I apologized. I said, hey, if this came across wrong, it was my fault because I didn't clearly specify this particular information that I was trying to give them and have them do in a task. And I realized, oh my goodness, I could have been more clear on what I expected and the outcomes. And then I couldn't answer them until tomorrow on this due to other commitments that I had. So I had to apologize, and I've had to learn to apologize. So apologies can be very helpful as long as we're not apologizing from things we've done every day. We keep doing it. We don't learn from it. So it's got to be sincere, and it also develops trust being in that vulnerable state. So vulnerability is another. Honest and in vulnerability with integrity is a great way to develop better relationships in every aspect of our lives, and especially in our business life, right? Because that's important. And why are we in business, or why are we in our careers? Well, because we're trying to take care of our family members. So we want to be in integrity in every area of our life because it all affects itself, or it all affects every other area. So also seek a perspective without giving up your leadership. So it's ideal if you have trusted advisors and not committees. Trusted advisors, whether that's a coach, whether that's somebody on your team, whether that's somebody outside your organization. I don't know what capacity they might be in, but many times people on your team or team leads can be great people to bounce ideas off of, but they have to understand, and you have to understand, that you are the one who makes the final decision, that you're looking for information by this timeline so you can gather more to make a more intelligent decision, and give them the due dates. And sometimes you won't be able to get all the information that you would like to have, but with the information you have, with your deadline, that's not just some random point out in the future. When you do that, you're going to get some type of answers or feedback, and people will respect you for that because you're trying to get their information, their perspective on some of these decisions you have to make. And then you have to make the call. And once you make the call, you have got to own it and communicate it clearly. So leaders under fire especially have to have the right mindset, and conviction with humility is so key. Be convicted in the decisions you make, but be humble about it. Realize whatever decisions you make, it all lands on you if the poop hits the fan. However, realize you didn't get there on your own, that it's a team effort. So just if we go back to the whole football analogy, I love the idea when a running back scores a touchdown, or a receiver or a quarterback does whatever he does to create success, but then they give credit to those linemen who blocked or who made key blocks during the play and really sacrificed, because quarterbacks look great when their offensive line is blocking. That's the number one, as far as I'm concerned. And then the receivers or running backs get the other piece of that. But if those linemen, who you never hardly hear about, are not doing their initial job, the rest of that play falls short. And that team usually doesn't do very well. So it's so important that you have still conviction, but be humble about it. Also, another mindset is that your decisions are really perfect. We talked about this before. However, they are directional. Are they pointing in the ultimate outcome of what you'd like in an ethical way, with integrity, and with purpose? Because many leaders right now are looking for purpose in the work they do. How do they tie that in, rather than I just show up at work, I'm doing what I need to do, I'm leading, however, I've lost myself. I don't have any purpose, or I'm not really emotional or passionate about what I'm doing anymore. That should be diagnosed. Ideally, if where you're at, you feel is a direction you should be in, great. But maybe there's some questions in order for you to get more passion and purpose in your life. Maybe you might be looking at a new opportunity. And one interesting survey and stats that I've heard is almost 1 out of 2 people in the workforce are looking for a new opportunity. They're searching because they don't have fulfillment, they don't have purpose, and then down the road, maybe they feel like crap where they work because they're not treated well, they're not included, and that many times can deal with the disconnect from having purpose and meaning. Or maybe they're not getting paid well, but usually the pay is not something that's at the top of the list. Usually it's how they're being treated, and are they coming there with some type of means of creating value and impact in what they do, that they matter with the activities they do. Because any amount of time that we invest ourselves and other leaders, it's saying, hey, we're sacrificing something that we'll never get back. We can remake money. You can many times gain other things, but you cannot get back your time. So if people are investing time in your organization, or they're at a place of business, whatever it is, or if you're just one of the other leads in that organization, realize you want the best decision. And it's hard to hire people from outside of the organization. It costs more, takes more time. They don't have any of the internal knowledge of how that organization runs, or even pieces of it. So it costs way less to promote somebody from within the organization. So it's in everybody's best interest to do a good job. And some of these areas us leaders need to work on also are some of the soft skills of listening, of asking better questions, of having empathy, and reading someone with their body language, or a disconnect with what they're saying from what their body's saying, or maybe how they're working. Maybe they're making a lot of mistakes. Maybe they don't have the skill set they need, but they're afraid to ask or speak up if they're an introvert. And another area too is maybe you feel like you have imposter syndrome, so you're not willing to speak out or ask for help because you don't want to be considered as someone who's weak, or someone who isn't perfect, or someone who just doesn't have all the answers. And maybe, once again, you feel like an imposter. These are things that can be overcome. So lean into some of these challenges as they offer some opportunities for growth and learning. Another area and a mindset is fear. We talked about that a little bit earlier, having a fear mindset or a filter, as I say. You're filtering everything through your fear mindset. And fear usually wants to protect you or some parts of you that feel like, ooh, I can't be vulnerable in that area. Well, leadership requires protecting the mission and the people first. As a leader, in many ways, I call it servant leadership. You need to put yourselves last and look to the whole. And so it's kind of a tricky thing that I wholeheartedly believe in self-leadership, but that's for the ultimate outcome and gain of the whole organization and the people on your staff. However, it needs to start with self-leadership. What habits do you have? What routines? What type of journaling do you do to improve yourself? All those different areas help. Some other areas that are great are, who are you associating with? Are you always the smartest person in the room? There's not much you can learn from that. Or are you in rooms of people that are elevated higher than you are in the many different areas of intelligence, skill set, mindset, attitude, whatever it may be, income possibly, or revenue generated of business leaders? And if you are, and they've elevated beyond you or gone further down the road than you or where you'd like to be, then these are the kinds of people that will help push you up, help pull you up from some of the crumbs that you learn from their experiences. So it's extremely important that, this fear does want to protect you. However, lean into it and find out what you can learn. So when it comes to teams, we've talked a little bit about that too. How you communicate really determines how you make decisions and process things. And it's just not just the outcome that happens, but once again, how are you elevating your team? How are you creating new habits, new belief systems, new cohesion or better cohesion of everyone in your organization? So you move down the road more intelligently and you're adding 1% better, you're adding 5% more skill set, a better process that's fine-tuned. Because if we're just going down the road and repeating the same mistakes, or as many of you've heard, we're only as good as our weakest player on the team. I used to think about that and toil with that so much, but now I realize it. You can only go as fast as the slowest person, because that person, if it's a boat, that person could be the leaky hole in the boat. You keep dumping all the water out of the boat and trying to row faster. But if you got holes in the boat, it's going to weigh you down, it's going to slow you down, and you're always addressing things that could have and probably should have been fixed in the past. And that's what the coolest part is. The other area is inviting controlled pushback before finalizing big calls. I used to not like that because it's like, ooh, this could also reveal some of the imposter syndrome I've had or the weak areas in my life, and I wouldn't be a good leader. But I just didn't know that good leaders were not perfect. I didn't realize that good leaders didn't have all the answers. I didn't realize that leaders have ideally cultivated great people and resources around them that have some of the answers, have some of the knowledge that's needed to make great decisions. So invite controlled pushback before making these final calls. And once again, communicate how much you appreciate everyone for sharing what you share, because you're trying to make an intelligent decision rather than a rushed decision. And after action is taken by yourself or others, figure out what's worked. Slow down and figure out what has worked in the situation and what didn't work. This is one area that maybe we don't focus on enough. That's the leaky hole in the boat that slows us down, where we have to divert our attention instead of diverting that attention towards something positive and some gains. And then also ask, what's next? What's the best next thing you can do that will keep moving your outcome and your goals forward? So once again, you're landing, for use of aviation terms, you're landing at the right location and at the right time. And when you build this muscle memory, you're creating a new culture. You're making it easier for other people on your team to understand. And ultimately, this creates decision speed and clarity. And when you develop this as a habit, once again, these habits become subconscious or unconscious, and we just do them naturally. So we want to develop habits that are forward thinking and that are amazing in terms of every area of our life, because once again, every area of our life will be affected. What you do in one place, you will most likely do in another. And we also have to realize the concept that what got you here won't get you there. So you're here for a reason. And I think one of the most frustrating concepts I've ever heard is that you are where you are because you've decided that's where you want to be. And many areas of my life, I was like, no, I don't want to be here. Is it really my choice? Is it really my doing? And every leader that I've talked to, and the coaches that I've had, and the mentors, and the successful business people, or mentors in the church who are spiritual, who are great and wonderful people to follow in terms of Christianity, these people have said, yeah, we have to realize that we create a lot of the outcomes in our lives. Sure, there's exterior forces too, but in most cases, it's our decision making. And then, in my case, I'd always point the finger and run. Ooh, a decision, something that feels uncomfortable, I would tend to run. So you have to realize when the stakes are high, you need to slow down enough to get clear. Then act fast and own it. People can forgive a wrong call faster than a leader who disappears in the moment. Are you one of those leaders who disappears like I used to do all the time? Or just not make decisions? Like, oh, some other factor happened. I just couldn't make it. It wasn't my fault. And you have to realize that clarity is your competitive advantage. So realize the challenge that you can identify one decision that you rushed. And when you identify that, what's one thing you could do differently today from what you've learned? How could you make an improved decision on that? Little hint, slow down, think about it a little bit more. Get some other feedback from other people, but just realizing once again that you can also ask some of your team members for advice. And start that today. Stop waiting on all that stuff that feels uncomfortable. Start one little thing and just to move forward. And just realize when you get uncomfortable doing one thing that's in the right direction or moving things in a better place, it's going to get easier for you to move forward instead of backwards in some of these uncomfortable situations. So I appreciate you being here. I hope you share this episode with another leader who is in high pressure situations and needs help making critical decisions, especially when they're rushed, they're urgent, and they're stressful. So subscribe and share this. I appreciate you listening. And remember, clarity beats chaos every single time.